We just recorded a podcast going over all of the headlines and all of the updates except for Israel's stuff and the immigration debate that's been going on, and we just wanted to go over all of that. But Robbie, starting off, and this does directly relate to the immigration debate and especially the refugee crisis. In our previous podcast, we mentioned that Trump is dropping a bomb every 12 minutes that is permanently separating families. And I just think it's worth mentioning just the statistics going from Bush to Trump, where Bush dropped 70,000 bombs in 5 countries. Obama dropped 100,000 bombs in 7 countries. And Trump has ramped up that campaign to drop 44,000 bombs in his first year alone. That's 121 bombs a day. Every 12 minutes, U.S. obliterates innocent lives around the world. Again, the cognitive dissonance of Americans who don't understand or care for the fact that our bombs are permanently separating families on a daily basis every 12 minutes, or the cognitive dissonance of not understanding how the refugee crisis on a global scale is happening because of U.S. foreign policy. And this is just the Middle East. We can get into the dirty wars and the coups and the endless military incursions in Latin America later, which is where the majority of, obviously, those refugees and migrants are coming from. But it just kills me that we can't connect these basic dots.
What you just brought up is such an important part of all this. And I remember when all those like little small attacks were happening in Europe that seemed like they just kept happening. And they were all like, somehow they were all ISIS, which I don't even really know how they determined, other than it being in that ISIS magazine, where ISIS probably just takes credit for every fucking thing that happens. And I remember thinking at the time, how weird is it that no one in Europe, no politician in Europe is using American foreign policy is the reason why this is happening. It just seems like such an obvious thing. Like, why get mad at the refugees or the influx of like people coming in from Syria when source that's causing this is American foreign policy? If you believe it's all ISIS, or whatever. And I never understood why people never made that link, or even, like, just like a politician, you could use that energy and be like, look, this is a serious problem here. Like, they're causing all this anger and resentment, and they're taking out on us. They're not even taking out on the United States. That was always interesting to me, that no one would take that position as a mainstream, like, political sort of wedge issue. I don't know.
Do you think that they're too scared to isolate themselves from the U.S. because the U.S. has that much control and power, and it's like a taboo thing to talk about? I mean, why? I wonder what Jeremy Corbyn has said about it.
That's a really good point. I mean, I think now with Trump, definitely, probably there's more fear of that. Before, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, you had UK crazy politicians always saying stronger things about American foreign policy than any American politician was. But I mean, you see smarter ones who are like just marginalized, hidden figures saying stuff like that, but nobody in the mainstream sphere really at all. I mean,
yeah, and instead you see people like Nigel Farage becoming hugely popular, who just utilizes the refugee crisis and the migrant influx to just punch down and, have this proto-fascist like rhetoric that just takes off like wildfire because it's just the easiest scapegoat in the world. Let's jump right into this. 3,700 children are currently separated from their parents. It's a complete and total shit show. Basically, the Trump administration comes in with these little Nazis behind him, like Stephen Miller, to carry out this zero tolerance policy at the border. And we're going to get into how this was all built and what Obama did and what Bush did and what Clinton did a little bit later. But first, it's important to talk about how this actually is different. Because Trump is gaslighting everyone and basically deflecting everything on the Democrats. And again, it's a really smart tactic because this is how he rose to power, is just pointing out the hypocrisy of the Democratic Party and liberalism, which is dead on. But it's also a deflection from the fact that he is carrying out like Nazi style tactics.
Yeah.
And what's going on is horrifying. Thousands of children separated from their families. And this is everywhere, so I'm not going to get too much in the weeds of what's going on because I'm sure you guys have seen it wall to wall on all media. But I'm just going to kind of talk about the highlights here. I think it's really comparable to the Muslim ban, where he gets in there and, he has zero experience. The administration was barely even staffed enough. And they just put in these draconian authoritarian policies with no plan. No feasibility of how to even carry this out. Like, there was no structure even put in place to deal with this influx. There was no documentation supplied to these children. So you literally have almost 4,000 kids where their parents, a lot of them don't even know where they are. A lot of these children are babies. They can't speak. How are they going to get reunited? It is a complete disaster. Just like how the Muslim ban was carried out, people were mid-air, not knowing what the hell was going on. Could they land in the country? Could they not? I saw footage of New York City of kids with hoods on their head, like Guantanamo style, being ushered into cars. It's like, were they getting trafficked? Were they getting brought to another facility? What the hell is going on here? The traumatization and psychological abuse that's incurred from separating a child from their family is horrifying. It's harrowing, and it could actually just have lifetime consequences. I read from one neuroscientist that it could actually rewire your brain chemistry to reduce your life expectancy by up to 20 years. And I'm sure it's the same in war zones, obviously, again, going back to the foreign policy. And also on top of that, kids in these facilities are being injected against their will with psychotropic drugs that is making them disoriented, sleepy. They don't know what is in these drugs. They have no idea what the medical records are of these children or anything like that. So with all of this outcry and almost manufactured outrage, because again, we're going to get into what Obama was doing, and again, the cognitive dissonance of how we're actually separating families every day. But there was a mass outrage because, of course, when the media is showing wall-to-wall coverage of kids screaming and being separated from their families, people suddenly give a shit, right, about what's going on.
Yeah. It's worth analyzing what causes this sort of mass outrage all at the same time, because the media, if that's what caused it, the media playing the footage and and bringing this up constantly, what caused them to cover it like that? It's just very interesting the way that this all of a sudden, when the resistance decides that Russia's not the number one thing to go after Trump for, right when Trump got in office, remember the resistance, or the so-called resistance, and the mainstream media went full 10 out of 10, energy on the Muslim ban, the travel ban. And I remember even the Sergey brothers from Google were protesting in the airport and shit. It was very strange. I mean, even at the time I was thinking that's strange that this is all coalescing together. So there does seem to be something artificial driving it, but it's what is it? It's just like any other media blast, but yet it is such a horrifying and outrageous thing that it's not like a completely manufactured controversy, because it's based on an actual policy change. But you do have to wonder, how does this all sort of kickstart and snowball like this? Because it does seem like it's not just an organic thing on the media's part.
Yeah, no, good question. And I think the answer is a couple layers. I mean, you saw a similar outrage, like you said, during the Muslim ban. You saw a similar manufactured hysterical response to the chemical weapons attack, alleged chemical weapons attack. With all of these instances, it's the minutia of the Democratic difference between the Democrats and Republicans. So with the chemical weapons attack, there was obviously some sort of other apparatus that was trying to provoke Trump into, going to war full out with Syria at that point. And there was a thing going on within the factions of the establishment. Basically, and what we're going to get into is that Democrats and Republicans agree almost wholeheartedly on immigration. They agree almost wholeheartedly on surveillance, on all of the worst aspects of this criminal system and the empire. So when someone crosses a tiny line that makes the system look horrible, of course, they're going to utilize that to try to garner power in their own base. So the resistance jumped on these photos, even though Obama was doing something very similar, because it just looks better for them. And they're able to be like, no, we don't support this. We support humane mass deportation. We don't support separating children and tearing infants off when they breastfeed from their mothers. But we do support just separating the families after they go through the mass immigration trials and putting them in cages then. So I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it does seem like there is billions of dollars behind this when you have Hillary Clinton sending out fundraising emails from the Democratic Party saying this is in America, when you have Obama making giant Facebook notes about how disgusted he is, and you see videos of him talking about how every child across the border is as his own.
That was
that
really
he loves them the same as his own son.
Well,
and when you have Bill fucking Clinton talking about it too. So all of these people who actually helped create this apparatus that Trump has naturally exacerbated, that's the logical conclusion of this policy. Yeah, you have to wonder what exactly is going on here.
The Obama thing was really interesting to me because he's been awfully sort of like in the background or just sort of silent on a lot of the resistance narratives, like especially when it comes to Russia. So to have him sort of come back and be like joined together with Clinton and Laura Bush on this immigration thing, it's interesting. I mean, it does seem really coordinated, and it does seem like a weaponized sort of political issue to go against Trump, even though it is such a horrible real thing. So yeah, I have really mixed feelings about it because it's like, of course, I don't want them to be doing this to families at the border. But then, yeah, I mean, the Obama policies were almost just as bad. So you really do have to look at, everything in context. But just like the drone bombings and the bombings, I mean, Trump has employed a zero tolerance policy and actually like increased the horribleness of this policy. So it's hard to find a position. It's hard to find people talking about it who I like feel like are talking about it honestly and in proper context, because a lot of people are talking about it via lies of omission. If you go back to the timeline of when this outrage started, it was actually very interesting because all those pictures came out in that Freedom of Information or something.
Oh, like the ACLU report?
Yes. And everyone was posting them around saying this is fascism. This is horrible. Look what our president's doing. He's treating these people like animals. And I remember thinking, well, but this is actually from 2014. These pictures aren't from right now. And only a few people were pointing that out and trying to like correct things, being like, well, actually, this is what these pictures were from the Obama era. And then all these Democrats were just talking about the pictures as if they were taken right now in the Trump era. And that's not to say that there aren't pictures that are equally as horrible happening right now in the Trump era, but it was like their outrage was very bizarre to watch because they completely missed the point where it's like, actually, this happened in the previous administration. I mean, you remember
Thanks,
that
Susan
that was like a
Sarandon.
few weeks ago, right? What?
I said, thanks, Susan Sarandon.
So
you're right. The ACLU had that report put out. It was from a FOIA request under Obama. It was actually Customs and Border Patrol agents as well. And that's because Obama oversaw policy where thousands and thousands and thousands, like for example, in 2014 alone, 47,000 children who were unaccompanied minors were arrested and put in cages. So, and Democrats will, if you bring that up, they'll be like, yeah, well, this is different because he's separating them from their families. And those were like kids that were coming over alone. But yeah, no, you're totally right. Again, where was the outrage? I was outraged when I saw those photos in 2014. Department of Homeland Security was created. People have no recollection of this. This is a new agency that was created after 9/11 that was injected with billions of dollars of cash. This was kind of the fire sale that happened that James Risen elucidates in his book. That was just a cash injection to any bureaucratic agency that wanted it, and especially creating new ones. Of course, when you're, you've pumped up all the other ones, you got to create new ones, right? Got to get those jobs. So November 25th, 2002, the DHS was founded. And then the next year, March 1st, 2003, ICE was created. These are new agencies that absolutely should be abolished. This is not a radical measure to call for these agencies to be completely eliminated. And I find it really funny that people are like, oh, that's crazy. It's like, dude, these are literally like only a decade old.
Well, it's just so funny because it's like, it's literally an agency that exists under the umbrella of Homeland Security, another agency created in response to 9/11.
Yeah, to treat immigrants like terrorists.
Yeah,
that's
so,
what it is, to basically militarize the border and treat it like a war.
Yeah, so if you were doubtful before that the war on terror bureaucracy would be used and turned in on people other than suspected terrorists, then like this is one of the most obvious examples I've ever seen. Because it's like the context is totally missing. It's like when people are talking about ICE in the media, they mention that it's a new agency, but they don't mention that it's like an umbrella agency under the Department of Homeland Security created as a reaction to 9/11.
Right.
And I think if a lot of people knew that, they'd be like, well, yeah, then of course we should abolish it. Don't we have Customs and Immigration Enforcement, Border Patrol agents already? Yeah.
Let's talk really quickly about what Obama did I'm reading from McClatchy right now about Barack Obama separated parents from their children at the border. Obama prosecuted mothers for coming to the U.S. illegally, fast-tracked deportations, and yes, he housed unaccompanied children in tent cities, like we mentioned before. Blah, blah, blah. I mean, basically, we know that Obama was doing it. So let me, he was the Deporter-In-Chief. He deported 2 million people in his first 5 years. That's more than any other administration in the entirety of administrations before him in that same time period. We'd be remiss to not talk about how we got here. And going back to what we were saying at the beginning, how did our policies affect migration and immigration? And I think it's really, really important to go back to NAFTA. Passed in 1994, and going back to Trump, I mean, he used and brought up NAFTA in almost every single time he gave a speech. And, people understand how detrimental NAFTA was, but really it was devastating. It was under the guise of this free trade partnership with Mexico that would bolster the economy and curb immigration. That's what it was sold as. It did literally the opposite. It heavily subsidized U.S. crops, flooding in, drove production down, consumer prices up, sweatshop labor surged. 28,000 small and medium-sized businesses in Mexico were destroyed in the first 4 years of NAFTA. 28,000. And here's the most important part to know. The price of corn, which was Mexico's main staple, fell by almost 70%. And what did that do? It ejected 2 million small farmers from their land. We're talking about rural farmers in Mexico who were forced to migrate to sustain their lives. This neoliberal development model of NAFTA basically stunted Mexico's food independence forever, where now they actually import almost 50% of their food. 50%. And guess what happened to undocumented immigration? Well, it rose almost 200% after
Jesus
NAFTA.
Christ.
I forget, even though we kind of know in the back of our minds how bad NAFTA was, when you really look at the statistics, holy shit. To prepare for it, that's when the wall was built. Operation Hold the Line and Operation Gatekeeper, Operation Safeguard, 3 operations put in place along the 2,000-mile U.S.-Mexico border in anticipation for the upsurge of immigration after NAFTA was passed. It's just incredible. So that was all before 9/11. The wall was instructed. And then I want to get really quickly, and I really encourage everyone to watch our documentary for the Empire Files called The Empire's War on the Border, because it's just the most heartbreaking stories of these people who cross, and they won't stop crossing. There is no deterrence. It doesn't matter if they're deported 5 times. They will continue to come back because almost half of them have family here, first of all. And the other half is probably fleeing death, murder, and torture, like we said. And literally anything, they'll risk everything to get away from that situation. So it's just nonsensical to think that these people are like lazy freeloaders who are just waltzing over here to try to take shit from us. In 1994, the death by deterrence strategy from Border Patrol, before that policy, Robbie, 5 bodies of migrants were found in the Arizona desert per year. After 1994, after Border Patrol put in this funneling policy where they funneled the wall into funneling migrants into the most death-defying route, so over this mountainous, treacherous terrain, over 200 just in southern Arizona. Hundreds in just southern Arizona. Every year, hundreds, if not thousands of people are dying in the desert trying to get here on purpose. It's actually one of the most cruel, disturbing policies, like a war that's been waged that no one knows about. Thousands per year are dying trying to get here. And I went out with No More Deaths, who are now being charged with felony offenses for leaving water for migrants, even though you can leave water for animals when they're fleeing fires. Apparently you get put in jail if you try to give fucking human beings water when they're dying. But this group is incredible. They go out there and try to leave water for migrants. And Dan Cohen, who did a lot of work for the documentary, interviews a lot of these people who are about to leave or who have just gotten deported. And their stories are absolutely mind-bending. And you cannot watch them without just having just complete and total empathy for these people. They are human beings. They're our brothers and sisters, and they need asylum. They're fleeing death. And a lot of these people who've gotten deported have died. Like that poor guy who got killed. He had grown up here his entire life. And that's another difference that Trump is doing as opposed to Obama, where Trump is actually deporting people who have been here their whole lives, who have no ties whatsoever to these war zones. And he's just like shipping them back there. Like in Mexico, someone died a week after they got there and they're pleading them. They said, I am going to die if you deport me, please. I've lived here my whole life. Dead within 2 weeks. Back to Mexico. So yeah, this death by deterrence strategy that Clinton oversaw, it is unbelievable how many people die. And it's just the most inhumane logic that death will be a deterrent. Well, there's no deterrence at all. It's just all death. And then you have Operation Streamline, which I'll just say really quickly. You should watch our hidden camera footage where we snuck into one of these like fascist court proceedings where they just shuffle in migrants like a slave auction, where they're chained with their hands and feet, they're clanking around, and they just go, Antonio, Alberto, da da da, and they go through this line of like 80 people, and they all just have to say culpable, like I'm guilty, I'm guilty, I'm guilty, and then they get shipped away to private prisons for $120 a day, right in the private prison CEO's pockets. And then they'll just, one of the guys, if they're lucky, they will be able to plead with the judge, please. This one guy said, please put me in prison in North Carolina so I can be near my family. He said, I haven't seen my daughters in years. He said, please send me there. I mean, it's just disgusting. And this was all going on while Obama and Clinton. I mean, this is how we got here. So before 9/11, there were 9,000 Border Patrol agents working America's border. Like you said, we had Customs and Border Patrol, and we had law enforcement or whatever that was doing that. They were already fascist enough. Like we said in the last podcast, they just indiscriminately killing kids, kind of similar to IDF soldiers who do whatever they want with impunity because these people are others and animals and they're trying to invade us and infest our country. But after 9/11, the DHS and Customs and Border Patrol is the largest law enforcement agency in the U.S. 46,000 agents now. And it's probably way more now. I did this documentary 3 years ago where these stats are coming from. Deciding to leave your home, your friends, your family, to leave to a foreign country that you could die going to. That is the most personal, intimate decision that someone can make, a human being could possibly make. And the fact that we're demonizing the people who we're putting in that position, we put them in that position. We put them there. And they're sacrificing everything to try to live and to make a life for their family. And even the MS-13 gang, I mean, this started in Los Angeles. We deported all these gang members from East LA who were also just trying to survive in the crazy system that we have, deported back to El Salvador. And guess what was happening in El Salvador? Dirty wars, the CIA operations going on there, the civil war that was raging under the administration of Ronald Reagan. And another interesting thing, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, is that under Obama, those unaccompanied minors that were coming, a huge percentage of them were Honduran. And what happened in Honduras not too long ago? A fucking coup. And who was involved? Hillary Clinton, who bragged about it in her goddamn book, about how she was instrumental in the coup, that violence skyrocketed, went up hundreds of percentage points, and exacerbated the horrific things going on in Honduras. So, and this is on top of like at least 56 military interventions in South and Latin America from the CIA. And this is just on top of the drug war and the anti-communist shit that's been going on there for the last 100 years that the CIA has been doing. And you put NAFTA on top of that and this crazy operation that's going on to funnel migrants to die. So yeah, it puts a little bit more context in what's happening now.